All right, guys, welcome back to the Pursuit of Property podcast. Today, Cade and I are talking about one of our favorite topics that we've talked about so far, and that's going to be going on your first appointment.
Yeah, so for this episode, we're going to assume a couple of things before we dive in. So we're going to assume that you've already done all your marketing, you've talked with the seller, you've gotten all the way up to the point of setting the actual appointment with the seller. So we're not going to do a deep dive into, how to set the first appointment. We're going how to handle the actual appointment, right?
Yeah. So before you even go on an appointment, there's obviously a whole bunch of things that you've done. You've spent money, you spent time, your emotions are all over the place. So it's important that you get this right the first time. And like everybody talks about falling down to your level of preparation, things of that stuff. So let's talk about what you do before you even go out on the appointment, things of that sort. So what do you do when you're getting ready?
So I know when we were talking about having the appointment already set. So, and even before that actual time, you're going to want to confirm with the seller the time and the date. So you may have set it. You may have set it once. You may have set the appointment for a week out. You can't go that whole week and then show up to that seller's house at that date and time you talked about without confirming again the day before or the day of, right? Because it's just a waste of your time. I mean, they could have forgotten. You need to confirm that appointment day and time.
Before we even move on from that, I want to even say we said we weren't going to go into how do you set an appointment. Like we're going to go from you've already set it on. If you set an appointment a week out, you don't have an appointment. You have a maybe. That's my thought process. So if you have an appointment set up for a week out and you don't confirm, don't even waste your time going out there. They're not going to be there.
Yeah. Like say you do text them and ask to confirm, or you call them and ask to confirm and they ghost you. Don't waste your time by going out there. You don't have confirmation. You don't have confirmation.
You're wasting your time by even driving out.
Yeah. And so at the same time, you're confirming your appointment day and time. You're also going to want to make sure, in our experience dealing with these appointments we've gone on, is that if at all possible, making sure all the decision makers are there, right?
Always.
And I ran into this a little bit on the last investment appointment I just went on, that I'm still keeping in touch with the seller now 2.5 weeks after the appointment, because all the decision makers could not be there at the appointment. So if at all possible, make sure if it's a mother, if it's a father, if it's a sibling, if it's someone else on title that you're going to need their signature to sign off, if at all possible, ask the seller, hey, who else is going to be able to make it? That is an important part of this process, and who's going to be assisting you in selling the property.
Yeah. And if you don't have all the decision makers there, what's going to end up happening 9 times out of 10, even if you're a really good closer, is you're going to get, yes, but I have to talk to this person. Mm-hmm. And that's a maybe. And maybes are the worst case scenario when you're on an appointment, because you went there with the sole intention, especially you want to make sure that this is clear to the seller, with the sole intention of coming to an agreement. And so if they're able to push it off and say, well, this guy needs to be part of it, brother or uncle or whoever, then you want to have known about that ahead of time. And we're going to talk about in another episode about how you can sometimes figure that kind of stuff out.
Yeah. So we've got our confirmed appointment. You're now aware of if the seller and any other decision makers are going to be there. And then what do we do next prior to the appointment?
Well, even sometimes before I get off the phone, sometimes I'll even confirm facts like, hey, before I get out there, I just want to run it past you one last time. When we talked on the first phone call, you had mentioned that the home was 800 square feet. It's 2-bedroom, 1 bath. Is that right? Okay, great. I just wanted to make sure, do you have any other liens or, delinquent taxes, anything else that I'm going to need to help pay off in order to make a deal come together? You're just trying to fact find before you confirm. So this way you can run your numbers a little bit more accurately. And you're not throwing so many like bumps or anything like that, down the road.
So running numbers, that would be my next thing. Before I'm going on an appointment. So I've got confirmed details, dates, times with the seller. I'm going out on my appointment the next day. I'm going to sit here and I'm going to do a little bit of homework. So one, that means running some comps. If you're
what does that even mean?
If you're a licensed agent, you can log into the MLS and look at recently sold homes in the area, look at homes that are currently listed in the area, and look at homes that are currently in escrow in the area.
Yeah.
So you're trying to get a grasp of what would this home be worth if I were to come in and make it all brand spanking new and sell it back on the open market. Because we're going to work backwards from there to see what our offer price can be.
And again, this is how we do it. We do it differently. Everybody's different. Now, if you're not an agent, this is where you start having your first, maybe a little bit of inaccuracies, and maybe reaching out to an agent would be helpful.
Yep.
When you're running your comps and you don't have access to the MLS is like the gold mine of data. But you can go run your comps on Zillow. And we know plenty of people who have made a lot of money running comps on Zillow.
We ran comps on Zillow for our rental properties out in Indiana.
My only recommendation is if you're running comps on Zillow is maybe if you have a friend in the area who's a realtor, or if you know someone, reach out and get a second opinion. That's something that we've always talked about before going on an appointment, is getting a second opinion of your ARV.
Yeah.
Because you have to be cautious on that, because that's where a lot of people get optimistic and lose money.
I know every time, almost every time, either one of us who are both agents and have access to the MLS, when we're running our preliminary numbers, we still get each other's second pair of eyes on it just to see if, just to double check and reaffirm if we missed anything, because it never hurts to get that second set of eyes on it.
And it's a lot in part because we don't want to ever open a contract that we don't have the explicit intention of closing on. If you start fast running these numbers and you go out and you toss out a number and it's too high, and later you realize it's too high, we go with the intention of we're closing on it. So, we lost money there. That's our fault, not the seller who maybe made some financial decisions in order to take our offer.
Yeah.
Now, running backwards to get to the distressed property, you want to talk about how we've done that in the past and how we're doing it?
Yeah. So typically we start with that ARV, that after repair value, which is what we think if we were to go in there and flip the home, we could sell it for on the open market,
yes.
right? And so things you have to account for working backwards from there. So you're going to have holding costs,
which are,
and closing costs. So holding costs, one, would be any interest that is being paid to your lender. So whether that be a private money lender or a hard money lender, you're going to get a loan unless you're paying your own cash for this place. You're going to have to be paying your lender interest every month until that property is sold.
Right.
Other holding costs consist of, the PG&E, the insurance,
HOA or solar.
HOA, all that other little miscellaneous stuff that a lot of people don't account for. And then all of a sudden, when you've been holding a property for 6 months while it's being fixed, you're like, I thought I was going to make 40 grand. What happened to all this money? You got to account for the holding costs.
I have a great example that goes with this. It's Road 37. So I have a flip right now that we had accounted for this to be a slightly longer flip because we had to drill a well. And the well took a really long time. And my partner and I, Jason, were looking at it, and we just kind of see our profits ticking down because at this point, we had accounted for a 6-month escrow or a 6-month holding time frame, and we're going to be closer to 7. That tacks on an extra $3-4 grand in holding costs because we had to pay out something to the buyer because the escrow got delayed. Now they need money for the escrow. Now we need to pay out money for our lenders holding it an extra month. And it's having a really good relationship with your lenders is important too.
Yeah.
But we would never short our lender because something that we, didn't foresee, but that had our hand of control over.
Yeah. And something else we got to think about when you're trying to get to this rough estimate of where you would need to be with for the seller to put a deal happen. So we got our ARV, working backwards, we did our holding costs, closing costs. So when you turn around to sell the property, you've got to pay the real estate agent commissions for the listing, and typically as the listing, as the seller, you pay both the listing agent's commission and the selling agent's commission. Ranges between typically 5 and 6%, depending on what you decide to do when you list it. Right. Other closing costs, just fees to the title and escrow company, both on the purchase, because typically we like to an incentive we offer the seller.
We cover all the closing costs.
Is to cover all the closing costs. And then also on the back end on the sale, typically split 50-50 between the buyer and seller. So that's also something you got to account for. Let's do the big one. What do we usually account for rehab? Because we're flipping a property.
Yeah.
What's it going to cost to fix it?
Well, we're going to go over it briefly because really at the end of the day, this is a topic we could dive into for hours.
Yeah.
But typically, you get an estimated repair budget based off of what you've heard. And you have to listen to the seller at that point, and you make it clear to the seller that, you're taking them at their word. And so their honest opinion needs to be there. and your numbers could change. But when you get there, that's when you really crank out the final details. But, for our situation, typically we just throw in a placeholder of about $25 a foot, plus windows. If it needs AC or anything like that, or roof, we add those in. We have all these little formulas, but we'll talk about it in another episode.
Yeah.
That's the main portion of the price reduction.
Yeah. So you want to make sure you can at least, the goal before you go on that appointment, you don't want to go in blind. You want to go in with a sense of what things are worth in the neighborhood, and you want to have a sense of, can this be a deal or not?
The last thing I would say too is, when you're looking at sold properties, try to see what the more distressed properties are selling for. That would be a really good way that when you go in and you have that conversation, you can say, other investors appear to be paying anywhere in the ballpark of blank to blank for a property in this condition. Now you have some credibility because you ran your comps and you understand, well, here's what the fixed up homes sell for, and here's what the not fixed up thrashed homes sell for. You're Mr. and Mrs. Seller somewhere in the middle, and we have to really base it off the condition of the property.
Yeah. And so prior to the appointment, we've gone through a little bit of this. So we've confirmed with the seller. We've done a little bit of our preliminary homework. And the next step that we like to do in preparation is just to draft a copy of the purchase contract that we use when we purchase property.
Yeah.
And we typically fill out all the information in that contract. I think it's 3 or 4 pages.
Yeah.
It's just throwing in the address, swapping out the buyer name and also the seller name, but we're leaving the purchase price section blank
and the timeline.
The escrow closing time frame blank.
Now, to clarify too, we don't use the California Association of Realtors purchase contract. We use our own contract we had drafted by an attorney.
Yes.
So it's a little shorter and a little bit more to the point.
A little more simple. And the reason for prepping and having that contract is, one, a lot of the times, and I'll at least speak from personal experience, a lot of the times a seller likes to have a copy of the contract. If we don't get something signed on the appointment, I'm always saying, hey, this is a copy of the contract that I've used countless times, to purchase properties here. Please review it. If you have any questions or concerns or something sticks out to you that would make you uncomfortable moving forward with doing a deal, please let me know. I want to make sure that this is okay and you are completely comfortable with doing that.
Yeah. The last big thing that you and I have really practiced, we've always been big proponents of it, but it's scripting and practicing how you're going to execute. Especially if this is your true first appointment, or if it's just your first appointment with any seller, have a conversation with somebody that you know or trust that's pretty good at what they do. Like for me, sometimes I'll go talk to Benny, or I'll talk to Jason, or I'll call you, whoever it is, and you have that conversation. Here's the situation. Here's what I'm looking to do. Can we talk about it? Talk through what maybe some of the pushbacks may be, things of that sort.
Yeah, just catching each other. Well, and I remember doing this with my most recent investment appointment too, is just kind of getting the other person caught up to speed on a little bit of the details to see exactly what you were saying, what some possible objections might be, what could possibly pop up, and to best prepare to combat those objections and help the seller.
Right. And the last thing too is sometimes when you have that scripting conversation, there's like a issue that you didn't originally see, like, hey, well, you didn't ask this person where they're going next. Like, you need to ask that when you get to the appointment. That's something that you guys could talk about.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, we're not perfect. And if you get caught on a seller phone call and you're driving to an appointment and you're kind of, brain dead, and you set the appointment because of some stroke of luck, or, you're good at talking, great. Now you have the appointment, but you have no clue what you're walking into. And that appointment is the most important time to come up with a solution.
Yeah.
It's a first impression of sorts.
And the last thing that we talked about going into the preparation stage right before going on the appointment would be either on the way there, and it kind of ties into the scripting and getting yourself in the right mindset, which is either one, listening to a podcast or listening to a book on the way over that puts you in the right headspace for negotiations, for rapport building, for all these things that go into the appointment. And I think you were looking for...
If you're on YouTube and you can see, this book, Never Split the Difference, is a book that Cade and I listen to pretty frequently.
Yeah.
and it's by
Chris Voss.
Chris Voss. Chris Voss was a FBI and hostage negotiator. So if he can negotiate stuff, you can negotiate stuff. But it has a lot of practical tools, and especially if I'm feeling weak on a specific thing, like maybe I'm not very good at labeling, right now, and I've been struggling at labeling what the issue is, so that way we can solve the problem. Maybe I'll go listen to a certain chapter, or maybe it's Finding the Black Swan, which we'll talk about later.
Yeah.
But it's been helpful. It's a great reminder. It's kind of like when you're warming up and you're checking each muscle and making sure, like, okay, like this has been kind of warmed up. It's not the first time I'm using it today when I get there.
Yeah. And going in with that right mindset, I mean, can make or break your appointment. And I remember this has happened to each of us. And I remember this maybe a month ago. You would call me and you were like, dude, I just walked out. It wasn't an investment appointment. It was a listening appointment. And you were like, dude, I just did not feel good on that appointment. And then we talked and we were like, okay, why? What
did you do wrong?
What went wrong? Could we have done something beforehand, preparation wise, to get each other in the right mindset of going on that appointment? Because if you're not in the right headspace, not in the right mindset, it more than likely it's going to come across that way to the seller, and the seller's not going to have a good feeling walking away because they're going to be getting that impression and those vibes from you.
Yeah, and funny enough, on that one, I actually got the listing, and I almost wanted to ask him, like, why did you still choose to work with me? Because I knew that I didn't feel like I had done very well presenting solutions or presenting how I was going to provide, but they still chose me. So maybe it was also something that I needed to, after I reflected, kind of forgive myself a little bit. Sometimes we get down, especially on these first appointments, you're kind of nervous. I still get nervous sometimes from time to time when I go on a listing appointment. Yeah. And that was one of them. So, it's something to think about. When you listen to a book or a podcast, you've kind of hit the last step. If you're prepared in your numbers, you're prepared with your contract, you've scripted the situation and got a second pair of eyes on the whole thing. And now while you're going over, you're being reviewed how to talk, you're kind of in your best spot. Yeah.
You're going in there the most prepared that you can be, and setting yourself up for success on that appointment. So now let's jump into
you're there.
Getting to the appointment. You are there. You have met the seller. You're standing in front of the house and you're like, okay, you don't want to sit there and go, show me the house. That'd be great, right? No.
But it goes without being said, don't be late. Yes. That is big. Don't be late.
The thing, and I think, it's funny because we joke about it too, but I think being on time is late and getting there early is on time. Yeah. And then getting there late is just all bad. So setting that very first impression up with the seller in person, right? So you've made that first impression on the phone or text, and you've had all this rapport building up until that point. But typically before the first appointment, you haven't met the seller in person. So getting there a little bit on time, and at the very latest on time.
Yeah.
Earlier on time, and making sure you set that good impression. So I know the two things we've talked about being most important in our appointments are listening, being a listener to the seller, because typically they're in the spot because they've got a problem with their property and they're looking to sell it. There's really no other reason as to why you would be there at the appointment in the first place, right? And then number 2, building rapport.
Yeah.
Do we want to talk about what that means a little bit more? Like, what does that mean to build rapport with a seller?
Yeah. So, and the only time it's important that you talk is when you get out of your car and you're walking up, have a smile on your face and introduce yourself again. Because a lot of the times, if you don't introduce yourself again, they're not going to remember your name necessarily. You want them to remember your name. So you walk up, hey, Scott, nice to meet you. Thanks so much for having me out. Then they're going to say, oh, yeah, no problem. Like, what do you want to do? I'm going to say, okay, typically I like to walk through the house with you and get some photos for my own safekeeping. That way, when I'm done today, I don't have to come back. That's a big thing. They really like that. And then they'll say, okay, and they go to open the door and they start walking through and you say, so catch me up to speed. What's going on? And you can even say, we've talked before, but, I just want to make sure that I'm on the same page. You mentioned some stuff's going on. Can you catch me back up to speed? And they're going to run you back through the whole situation. And the really good thing is you're multitasking. It's that thought of duality that Pace talked to us about on our podcast.
Yeah.
You're taking photos and you're being meticulous, right? Because you want to not have to come back. But you're also giving the seller time to really tell you all the nitty-gritty details. somebody said that a lot of the information comes at the first 5 minutes before and 5 minutes after an appointment, and I believe that. But that middle portion is a lot of fact finding, and your whole goal should just be to listen. And then, when they bring up something like, yeah, but then I had to go pay off some debt and deal with that. And, oh, okay, you had to pay off some debt? And like it sounds a little intrusive, but if you're helping them with a huge financial decision, it's helpful to know what kind of debt they need to pay off.
Yeah.
Because then what if you offered too low and you lose out on the deal because you didn't realize that there was just a few grand more in debt that you could have figured out, maybe wiggled your numbers and made it happen.
Yeah. So that's interesting. That middle part you were talking about kind of reminded me of what we wanted to share too, is on your first appointment, on any investment appointment, don't be talking real estate the whole time you're on the appointment,
don't
right?
Don't talk about the house.
You're being an active listener. Someone says, yeah, this was my dad's house. He really loved golf. He golfed at the course right around the corner, XYZ. Find a way to relate to the seller. That is a huge part of rapport building.
Yeah.
But the biggest thing it
has to be genuine.
It has to be genuine. A seller will immediately recognize if you're not being genuine or if you're being sly or sneaky to try and build rapport or try and connect in a way that isn't there and isn't genuine. You've got to be genuine.
That's why everybody will say that, if you sound like a used car salesman is really what they're saying is that you're flattery. You're not using genuine appreciation. Like you could find appreciation with anybody over anything. And so when you walk in the house and they're talking to you and you're trying to build that rapport, one, I'm of the point that you don't need to try very hard to feel like you're one of them. If you're nice and you listen and you ask real questions, they'll feel like you're one of them. Don't sound like an interrogator or anything like that. But when the moments do come up where you're like, they mentioned like for us, like golf is something that we like to do. We try it with our friends. We're not very good at it. So it's something that we can relate with a lot of people. And they say, I like to golf. Oh, really? I love to golf too. Where do you play? Oh, I play, wherever. Oh, very cool. How long you been doing that? And you're catching up with them. And then later, that kind of stuff makes you feel like, oh, this guy's more of my friend. Like, this guy's not here, just for business. Like, he actually is getting to know me and helping me solve some problems here.
Yeah. And building that connection with the seller is what's going to get a deal done. I mean, think about yourself. If you're doing business with somebody or even like talking to somebody or being acquaintances or coworkers or friends with somebody, you're not going to connect with somebody if it's not genuine. If you can tell someone's fake and they're trying to use flattery and bullshit you're going to see that a mile away and people aren't going to it's not going to feel good, right? So that is huge.
Yeah. The last part is that a lot of this is setting you up for figuring out things outside of real estate. Sometimes when you get these real estate deals, I would even argue most of the time, unless it's like a tenant situation or a foreclosure, even in a foreclosure, it's outside of real estate issues coming into the real estate world.
Yeah.
So you're just trying to figure out who this person is and how you can help, right?
Yeah.
We all do stuff outside of real estate.
Yeah.
How can we help you there?
Yeah. And it's funny because we're going to do a little recap and take a deep dive of things that are super helpful on your appointment that came from a different podcast, the Bigger Pockets podcast, in which our investor friend who came to Fresno and who we know, Pace Morby, hosted, and he's doing a crap ton of business. But I wanted to say on that episode, try to find ways to help outside of real estate. So, excuse me, I remember him saying on his very first deal, him trying to lock up his very first deal, the seller was like, hey, I've got an offer of 15 grand more and, what can you do? And Pace had said, I'm sorry, Mrs. Seller,
go with that deal.
Mrs. Seller, I can't make that work. If you've got an offer at 15 grand above where I'd be, you should take that. But please let me know if you need help, moving anything. I've got a truck you can move. Or in this situation, the seller had a bunch of bunnies that needed to be relocated. And Pace was like, let me talk with my mom and we can go grab those bunnies and relocate them. And then the seller ended up coming back to him and saying, hey, I'm not moving forward with that other offer. I want to do business with you. And it's figuring out ways when you're genuine about it too. It goes back to being genuine. If you can find ways to help the seller, they're going to appreciate that.
That's really key. Pace is a really cool guy to look out for. Pace has a TV show, the Six-Figure Flip on A&E.
Triple digit flip.
Yeah. And that's really cool. He also was on Bigger Pockets. If you are new to real estate and you're hearing us, go listen to Bigger Pockets.
Yes.
They've got really, really good guests, really great content, and they're super consistent. We listen to them as well. But we got a lot of this from Pace on one of his episodes with Bigger Pockets. It most recently came out. It's called The 5 Questions to Ask Every Seller. So it was coincidental that we use a lot of similar questions, but he packaged it in a great way, and we wanted to share it with you guys. So one of the first questions he asked about is about a black swan question, is what he called it. Mm-hmm. But it's interesting, being realtors, we can ask this question and it doesn't sound weird. Yeah. And that question would be, what did your realtor say? Or, are you planning on listing this with a realtor? Essentially, you're figuring out, is this person even going to be selling this to an investor? Or is this an on-market deal? A lot of the times we go on appointments, they can be on-market deals, and we might have an extra opportunity to try to secure it as a listing. Yeah. But more importantly, if they say, oh, I don't have a realtor, or I don't have an agent or whatever, you kind of have a better idea of what you're playing with. Like, this guy doesn't want to go on the market, or else he would have called a realtor. I mean, everybody knows 5 realtors. Yeah. So this guy has something going on that makes him think, I don't want to deal with the real estate market. Yeah. Is that what you think?
Yeah, 100%. And it's being able to weed out, and it goes back to, you don't want to waste your time on non-quality lead. Like, we're in a business. If you don't want to spend your time calling and talking to leads and people who are, if you're a pure investor, who are better suited listing on the open market. So asking that question up front to be able to figure out if there are any black swans, it's like, okay, great. Yes, my agent said XYZ, or no, I haven't contacted an agent. I really don't want to list on the market. But the big thing you said is potential routes to still collaborating, or as Pace and a lot of people like to call it, squatting up and figuring out a win-win for everybody, even if there is an agent involved.
Right. Like, we've even had deals where we pay out realtors, because maybe they brought us the deal, or we list it with them on the back end. Mm-hmm. The important thing is that you're still solving the seller's problem, right? Like, people are always nervous because we're realtors and agents, and other people, it's like, well, are you looking out for the seller's best interest? What people forget is sometimes their best interest isn't, or what they're most wanting to do is not the highest price. Mm-hmm. And if a realtor can find you an investor who's able to close and give you a pretty good price, that might be your favorite answer. Yeah. And so for us, we want to know if there's other players. We even want to know if there's other investors. We'll ask, like, hey, 100%. Do you have any other offers? Who are you working with? Because we probably know them. Yeah. And if we know them, we might not even submit an offer. If they come to us and say, yeah, we have an offer and it's with this guy, Dean, it's like, oh, hey, Dean's really, really good at what he does, and I bet that Dean's going to have a better offer than me to begin with. Yeah. So if there's anything I can do to help you outside of real estate, let me know. But I recommend that you work with Dean.
And on a side note, I think that's one of the coolest things about it. Goes back to being genuine and building relationships with other investors. I mean, we've got a really tight-knit community of investors here in the Central Valley, and stuff like you're talking about, which has happened to both of us. It's cool to be able to know that, in our tight-knit group, we're not looking to go and screw people over or outbid somebody else. You know what I mean? Like, we know there's plenty of stuff to go around.
Yeah. How about that? There was also, before we jump off that topic, there's also been experiences where you went to listings and you found people like Darren Wade, and they're the listing agent. And guess what? Now you and the listing agent are able to come to the seller with 2 completely separate opportunities. And the seller now has a decision. Do I work with Kate or do I work with Darren? Yeah. That's it. Yeah. It's not like there's another option in their head. Yeah. So that's been really cool. We've seen that happen.
And either way, in that example, the seller ended up wanting to go the listing route with Darren, and that's a freaking dope win for this. Like,
there you go.
It's a win-win.
It's another listing for a friend that we know.
Yeah, 100%. And so the second question that you're going to want to ask the seller on your first appointment and in every appointment, which may sound a little weird or contradictory for you if you haven't been out on your first appointment or aren't really deep dived or well experienced yet, is asking the seller, are you okay with me telling you if we're not a good fit?
And this is often on your confirmation call when you're calling to confirm the appointment. Hey, we're coming out with the intention of making a deal. In the event that I'm not the right person, are you comfortable letting me know that I'm not the right person, and vice versa?
And from what we've listened to and what we've experienced, why is that a good question to ask?
One, you're setting an expectation, and the expectation is that nobody's being forced to work with somebody. When you put somebody in a corner, they always react aggressively and defensively, and we're not here like some shark investor trying to take advantage of you. Like, we're trying to come up with a solution here. So if the solution's not great, you don't have to work with me. But vice versa, if you come to me and you have this house and it doesn't make sense, I'll let you know. I'm not going to make an offer on a house that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And it's okay. At the end of the day, we're just having a conversation and seeing if we can, have a win-win solution.
Yeah.
It creates like a chasing almost effect.
Yeah.
Because sellers in those positions at times, they have a lot of people calling. Like, there's a lot of investors. And they start thinking, well, I'm, the talk of the town. I could do whatever I want to this guy and he'll still buy my house. By setting it up this way, you set up a better relationship.
Yeah. And I like the example you just used with the seller getting a bunch of calls or getting a bunch of postcards and stuff. They expect us to be salesy. They expect, they don't expect for an investor to come in and be like, and up front, you've done all this work to be the one to go on the appointment. They don't expect you to say, are you okay with me telling you if we're not a good fit, and vice versa? That it kind of catches them off guard a little bit. And like you were saying, kind of almost creates that chase effect. Like, what's wrong with my house? Yeah, exactly. And that's a great, not even negotiating tactic, but just a great tactic to set yourself up for the negotiations on that appointment.
And the biggest thing there too is you disarmed any fear that they had that they can't just tell you it's not a good fit.
Yeah.
And now you can have more honest conversation. You're not going to get the maybe when it's really a no.
Yeah.
After that, you start looking into the future. So you've spent the whole first half of your appointment figuring out what's going on and whatnot. Now we kind of transition into, well, what's next? So for us, and how Pace also brought it up, the next really important question to know is, like, in a perfect world, where are you going? Like, if you had a magic pencil and you could draw your future, what would that look like? Are you staying in town? Are you staying in the house? Are you moving into a house with family? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah. And that works both. In that sense, we're talking about an owner-occupied house, right? So they currently live in the house. But it works for non-owner occupied too. If it's a rental, what do you plan to do after you sell this? And then they could be, say, I'd love to 1031 and roll it into, something else. Or, I'd really like to use it for retirement, or I'd love to put it away for my it's just figuring out and that's just peeling back more layers of the onion. What's important to the seller? And that's another huge question, to be able to figure out where they're at.
And the reason why you want to know where they're at is because your solution varies depending on what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
If they want to move this money into the next house, they need to sell it up front. But maybe if they're just looking to use it as a retirement, maybe taking terms and having some kind of a monthly payment is helpful. What's really key is also coming to the conclusion that you can paint a picture once you know where they're at now and where they want to go. And if you can see that vision and show them that you see the vision, now you can show, here's where I fit into this plan.
Yeah. And just being able to touch on, again, finding, maybe other ways to help if they're like, well, crap, I don't know really where I'm going next. I've got a lot of stuff I need to move out, or I don't know. If they don't know where they're going next, obviously, typically you're not going to want to close on a house that still has a seller in it, right? And them not know where they're going next. So it's good to figure that out up front instead of after escrow closes and you're like,
absolutely,
oh crap.
Yeah.
So fourth question that you're going to want to ask on your first and every appointment is asking the seller, how will you know that you've made the right decision? And taking that, that's another kind of question that kind of catches the seller off guard, because that's not really something they're thinking about going into the appointment. And again, the initial perception of, a bunch of people want, all this and all that, it makes them kind of stop and think a little bit like, how will I know that I made the right decision by working with you?
It's interesting too, because when you phrase that, there's a lot of phrasings where you can ask, how will we know we made the right decision?
Yeah.
And you start using subliminal we's. The other thing is you're arming them for when they get pushed back, right? Because we've all had it where we have a deal. We think we're locked up. And then dad or uncle or whoever comes in and, they're doing what they want to do as a dad. They're trying to be helpful. They say, oh, this is wrong and fix this. But what they're really doing is canceling a deal because they didn't realize that their kid's situation is as dire as it might be, right? And so now you're looking at it and you're saying, what are you going to tell your family when you tell them that you made this decision?
Yeah.
And now you're going to hear what they say and you can start arming them like, okay, well, you can bring up to them that, we solved all these problems and you list off this, that, and the other. And, so we're going to be buying your house and we're giving you a spot to live for 15 days after. And you're going to have your money to go get your next apartment. And, we're helping give you a loading truck to get you over there and all that, and now when they go talk to them, it sounds like, hey, that's a pretty sweet deal. And they feel better about it than when their family says, well, you could have listed it on the market and made 20 grand more. Are you too good for 20 grand?
Yeah.
Well, they don't really know the market. They might even say it's worth 100 grand more.
Yeah.
If you don't do your research, you can have an opinion. It's just not valid.
And like you were saying, and like we talked about in the very first question, this is another opportunity to find any more black swans or if any more of these things pop up. Well, how would we know if we made the right decision? And then the seller could say, my attorney will say yes and approve the sale. And if up until all the way that point, you haven't heard anything about an attorney, now you just uncovered another black swan where you're like, okay, now this also has to go through your attorney. We need the okay from the attorney. So it equips you with more information and just gets everything out in the open.
And you can now restart and start figuring out the painting a little bit better and figure out how you're going to work it.
Yeah.
Okay, last question. This is probably the most important, right? So at that point, right, you've come to a conclusion. It sounds like everything's a good go. Mm-hmm. Now you put the onus on them and you say, okay, if we could get everything that I just told you done, what would be your next step? And 9 times out of 10, they say, time to sign a contract, or let's, get this over to my attorney, or whatever it is. Boom.
Yeah. And asking them that question, I think inherently not only makes them feel, it makes the seller feel a little more important, but it kind of makes them feel like even a little more of a decision maker, right? So so typically up until this point, you're being a big decision maker, you're fact finding, you're relaying information, but when you ask the seller, assuming we can accomplish everything we talked about today, what would be our next step? And like you were saying, 9 times out of 10, the sellers are like, well,
if you've done everything else right.
Yeah, let's sign a contract. When it comes from us, when it comes from a buyer to the seller and we're wrapping up a call or saying something in person.
Like, do you want to sign?
Yeah. So it's like, well, I can send over the contract to you via DocuSign right now, or, right after we get off the call. That kind of puts the seller in panic mode, like,
he's trying to close me.
Yeah, exactly. So asking that question and putting it in the hands of the seller. And like you said, 9 times out of 10, they're going to say, let's sign the contract. So I think that is a great recap of the bare minimum 5 questions that you should be asking on the appointment to fact find, to build rapport. And if it is your first appointment and you're going in nervous as hell, because I know if it's your first appointment, and like you were saying, even now, I get nervous going on appointments.
I get excited.
I get pumped signing a contract. I know when either one of us sets an appointment, we're like literally text each other. We're like, bro, going on this investment appointment. Yeah, it's like a little bit of nerves, excitement, but that kind of gives you, your bare minimum of 5 questions going in. If you walk in with those 5 questions, you're going to be so much more well equipped than if you're going in blind.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go through the 9 times out of 10. So 9 times out of 10, they say yes, right?
Yeah.
So that's when you bring out your contract.
Yeah.
What's important when you bring out your contract at an appointment is to briefly go through kind of what this contract is saying.
Mm-hmm.
It's, again, you're setting them up for when they go talk to their family.
Mm-hmm.
They feel confident, right? So you can say, look, here's the purchase price and here's the names and here's the property address. It's important that this, there's these clauses, right? So if something goes wrong, we can cancel for X reason or Y. We have an investigation period to bring in any contractors we need, X, Y, and Z. And have that conversation so that way they don't feel like they're just signing something and they don't know what it says.
Yeah.
And then from there, you say, okay, great. I'm going to be opening up escrow, and I'm going to be getting you a copy of this as well. What about the one time that they don't?
So when someone doesn't want to sign a contract, when someone's not ready to agree to the sale of the property, even if everything's gone right, that still means that there's something there that's holding them back. So now you're not back to square one, but you're back to the fact finding step. Why aren't they comfortable? What's holding them back? Who do they need to talk to? In order to make them comfortable? What needs to happen do they need to get personal belongings before they're ready to sign something, right? So it's doing another fact-finding mission, but then also the important part is setting the expectation for when you can follow up, right? So they're not ready to sign the appointment now. They sit, you do fact finding. They say, I just need to think about it some more, or, I really want to talk to my siblings about this. And it's like, okay, great. If I don't hear from you in the next 3 or 4 days, is it okay if I give you a call just to check in and touch base? And you set that expectation of following up and getting it across the finish line to a point to where you have the signed contract.
The other thing too is when somebody says maybe, I have a line now that I say that says, Cade, are you ready to, or Cade, what would be the next step? Well, I need to go talk to this person. Cade, I appreciate that and we can totally make that happen. But when I say maybe, usually it's one of three things. Usually the price is wrong, the person helping me is wrong, or the time frame's wrong. Mm-hmm. Are any of those, what's going on? Because I want to make sure that you and I are on the same page. Then they might just say, hey, yeah, if your price was 10 grand higher, I'd be ready to move forward with it today. But, that's 10 grand. I need to, kind of talk to my family and see what they think. That's when you have the decision. Would I rather make 10 grand less, potentially, or would I rather let this go back to a family member who could potentially say, you're completely doing this all wrong, and blow up the deal because they aren't listening to what the facts are?
It's so funny you mentioned that, because I had a deal that had almost that exact thing happen. It was a JV wholesale deal that I closed with Manjot. It was the Palm deal. So I was working and trying to lock it up. I had known the seller previously. He's a landlord here in town, and I don't even remember what I was trying to lock it up for. Maybe 130 or 135, and he's like, I don't know if I can make that work. I may just, rent it back out since the renters are moving out. I may go in there and do the work myself because he's a contractor. He's like, I may go in there and just fix it up and re-rent it out. But, I'll think about it and I'll let you know. So at that point, and this is where we were like, and still now, if you're close, and we know we can perform, we want to lock something up. So I had another investor here in town give the seller a call, just so it's somebody else giving them. I'm like, hey, I'm really close with the seller. Can you give him a call and just, kind of see what you can do, right? And kind of see where he's at. And so this other investor gave him a call, and the seller shared a piece of information that he had not shared with me, which was exactly what you were saying. The seller said, if I could get 150 right now, I would sign right now. I would sign this second. So the other investor calls me back and he said, dude, I talked to your seller. If you can get to 150, he said he'll sign right now. So, and I'm like, well, crap. Literally probably 30 minutes later, I had a contract drafted, emailed to the seller, and he DocuSigned it that afternoon for 150.
There you go. So what we're trying to say is that sometimes when you get that one person that says that they're not ready, it's because usually you made a mistake. You didn't find out that all the fact finders, or you didn't fact find who all of the decision makers are. I've even had it. I had a contract that I signed where I was at the house, and once we came to an agreement on terms, 4 siblings came over. Like they drove over to the house, and I signed it right there with them. Yeah. So, it comes down to there's usually more information. If it feels like you can't do it, it's because there's more information that you need to find. Yeah. Once you have it all signed.
Once we've got it all signed.
The next step is to go back to your office. Yes. Or your house. Draft an email and send the copy over to the seller. And open escrow all at once. Once escrow is opened, immediately drive over and deposit your earnest money. Because at that point, escrow is now established and you have everything done. Now you can go look for how you're going to disposition it, whether you wholesale it, flip it, wholetail it, joint venture, whatever. Now you have the house under contract and you can go do the next step.
But what's so important about putting in the EMD immediately, right? I mean, we've got a signed contract. I mean, escrow's open. What is our rush on making sure we put in the EMD as quick as possible?
Well, once you have your earnest money in, it's the next level of protection because now you have liability or like leverage on the house.
Mm-hmm.
There is money tied to the house with your name and the signed contract.
Yep.
Now the seller can't just walk away real quick. Not to say that they will, but to say that we've had moments where even with all of this preparation, a family member comes in and tries to say, oh, well, you're going to sell it to them for $150. I'll buy it for $152 from you.
Yeah.
And they try, well, hey, man, look, you were family. You should have figured that out.
Mm-hmm.
If they're not signing, this is where the fortune comes in. If you go on an appointment and it went well, you know there's motivation, price, condition, whatever, right? And there's a couple things missing. Put them in your CRM. Update your notes as full as possible with as many details and set your follow-ups. It is key at this point to move forward and continue to touch base.
And continuing to touch base, I mean, that's a super key important part too, because you don't want that to fall through the cracks. I mean, I know we've both had deals and it pops up where you go on that first appointment, but then, you know, for X, Y, and Z reasons, they're not signing and it's not the right time, but then time passes. And then you may find yourself going out on a second appointment to the house, you know, 2 or 3 months later. So it's like now you're kind of running through this all over again. You know what I mean?
Yep.
To see
Updated.
kind of what's changed and what's updated. Yeah.
Well, shoot. I think that's a pretty good guide for your first appointment if you've never done it, or even if you have and you need a refresher.
100%. I think the big key takeaways for you guys who have not gone out on your first appointment yet, you get to the point where you have it scheduled and you're sitting there pumped, a little nervous, is you've got to go in with the right mindset. You've got to be on point, mentally ready to go. You've got to go in prepared. Do your homework beforehand. When you're on the appointment, be genuine, build rapport, be a good listener, ask these fact-finding questions that are going to help you in the long run. And then whether that results in a signed contract in your first freaking escrow and your first deal, great. If it doesn't, figure out where things could have gone wrong, throw them in the CRM for follow-up because, you know, the money's in the follow-up.
Absolutely.
So thank you guys for tuning in to today's episode of the Pursuit of Property podcast. This is a topic we've had a lot of people ask about. We've coached people through how to handle their first appointment, which has been really cool for us because we're no masters by any means, but being able to coach people through and kind of help them along and coach them through their first appointment has been awesome. And like you said, a great refresher for those even going on a lot of appointments. So if you guys have any questions that pop up, if you guys get your first appointment scheduled and you want some advice or anything before going in, we're always, I know we say this at the end of every episode, but our door is always open.
Yep.
So please feel free to reach out and we'll see you on the next episode of the Pursuit of Property podcast.
Thanks for tuning in, guys.